No gunshots, no sirens, just a soft mechanical hum echoing through the early morning fog. At 3:47 a.m., deep in the occupied region of Zaporizhia, a freight train was moving, slow, heavy, and blissfully unaware. It wasn't just any train. It was carrying something more flammable than politics in Eastern Europe. More than 800 tons of diesel fuel, the lifeblood of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and mobile rocket launchers. The kind of fuel that doesn't just power engines, it powers invasions. On paper, the train was routine. No armored escort, no electronic jamming, no decoys. Why? Because it had always made it through before. Complacency, the oldest weakness in warfare. And that's what made it perfect. Overhead, the sky was still. Not silent, but still. A different kind of noise crept in. The faint buzz of propellers, too quiet to trigger any alarms. No radar painted it. No soldier noticed it. And even if they had, they wouldn't have thought much of it. A drone? At this hour? What could it possibly do? That's where they were wrong. The drone wasn't just flying, it was stalking. Roughly 15 feet in wingspan, with a body carved from hobbyist parts and battlefield improvisation, the Ukrainian drone had no fancy stealth coding, no AI targeting, no James Bond tech. But what it did have was terrifyingly simple. A PG-7VL warhead, originally designed to blow holes through Soviet tanks. Strapped underneath, it made this cheap little drone the equivalent of a flying landmine. A heat-seeking wasp with a vendetta. From above, the train was a line of steel in a dark forest. Easy to see, easier to hit. But the drone didn't strike immediately. It circled, it studied. And then, in a move that probably made someone in Kyiv smirk, it waited. Why? Because the first rule of tactical drone warfare is psychological. Never attack when expected. Attack when it matters. And what mattered most? When the train was deep inside a repair yard, surrounded by other infrastructure, boxed in by trees, and vulnerable from all sides. That's where the drone dropped. Fast, sharp, surgical. At 3:49 a.m., the first explosion lit up the trees like a sick sunrise. Then came the fire. No soldiers had time to respond. There were no air defenses nearby. Why would there be for a train? And that was the point. Ukraine didn't just hit a fuel train. They exposed a blind spot. They proved that you don't need cruise missiles to punch a hole in your enemy's gut. Just a drone, some patience, and the right silence. But this was just the opening move. And what followed was even smarter. The fire didn't ask for permission. It leapt from tanker to tanker like it was trained. Diesel exploded in cascading waves, turning train cars into steel confetti. By 4:02 a.m., what was once a routine logistics movement had become an 800-meter firestorm, enough to be spotted by satellites, weather stations, and probably some very nervous birds. Russian soldiers scrambled to respond. But to what exactly? There were no sirens in the woods, no incoming missile trails, no jets overhead. Just fire. Glorious, confusing, enemy-less fire. And that's what made it worse. You see, most militaries train for contact. The enemy is supposed to show up with guns, tanks, maybe some yelling. But drones? They don't yell. They don't give speeches. They don't even show their face. They just erase your assets while you're still making coffee. In this case, Ukraine didn't just destroy fuel. They erased Russian confidence. And within hours, the second front of this operation launched. The one that flies through cables, not clouds. The information war. Satellite footage emerged. TikToks surfaced. And somehow, pro-Ukrainian Twitter accounts had clearer footage of the blast than local Russian command. It wasn't just a strike, it was a message, edited and delivered in 1080p with dramatic subtitles. But here's the military brilliance. Ukraine never officially claimed the hit. They let the footage speak. They let Russian logistics officers do the panicking. Why? Because claiming credit is loud. But uncertainty is louder. It makes the other side guess. Was this a one-off? A test run? Are more trains being watched right now? That's when something remarkable happened. Train routes were altered. Entire supply schedules, serving frontline armor divisions, had to be rerouted, rechecked, or paused. Just from one drone, one strike, one train. Imagine trying to win a race while secretly siphoning your own gas tank. And yet, the most chilling part? This wasn't even a drone swarm. This was one unit. One drone, maybe two, with a budget smaller than a tank's oil change, used to delay an army. The next morning, Russian state media released a statement blaming an unidentified fire. Of course they did. Because no one wants to admit they got outplayed by a flying lawnmower with a grenade. But Ukraine? They didn't need to say a word. Their warhead had already delivered the message. By now, Russia wasn't dealing with a battlefield. They were dealing with a chessboard where the enemy had figured out how to play several turns ahead, using drones that don't even need to leave a return address. Let's zoom out. This wasn't just about a train. It was about what the train represented, the arteries of a war machine. That train carried diesel not just for tanks, but for trucks, artillery, mobile HQs, and the 1,000 other logistical vampires that feed on fuel every hour. The entire Russian front line, hundreds of miles wide, runs on fossilized sunlight. And this strike? It just threw a rock in the fuel stream. Suddenly, every commander on the Russian side had a new math problem. How long can we hold this line if our fuel takes 8 hours longer to arrive? And here's the kicker. When you're on the defensive, you don't have the luxury to pause. The enemy won't wait for your new delivery schedule. They'll simply strike again when you're weakest, which now happens to be every time you send a train. In military doctrine, this is called logistical denial. But in 2024, it has a more modern name: precision harassment. You don't need to win with brute force. You just need to make the other guy hesitate. And in war, hesitation kills. While Russia scrambled to restore that stretch of railway, Ukraine's drone operators probably moved on to their next target. And that's what makes this so terrifyingly effective. Russia is now playing whack-a-mole. But the moles fly, and sometimes they explode. Let's talk impact. Delayed armor movements, interrupted supply drops to artillery units, reduced fuel for mobile air defense systems, lower morale from troops stuck waiting in exposed positions. Oh, and one more thing: insurance. Every civilian contractor or rail operator near the front line now has to ask, is this shipment worth the risk? The bigger implication? Russia's enormous geography, once its strength, is starting to feel like a burden. Every supply run takes longer. Every reroute stretches thinner. And Ukraine? They just need a few well-placed drones to stretch them beyond their breaking point. And if Russia over-responds, pouring more security, more troops, more assets into guarding these lines, Ukraine still wins. Because now they've forced the bear to bleed energy just staying still. That's the brilliance. This wasn't a one-off attack. It was a lesson, delivered in flames. This war is no longer about territory. It's about flow. And whoever controls the flow, controls the war. Let's make one thing clear. This wasn't a lucky strike. It was calculated choreography, and the music was digital. In the old wars, you needed maps, radio operators, and forward scouts risking their necks. In this war, all you need is a $400 drone, an internet connection, and a team of operators who don't blink. So how did Ukraine pull off an attack like this, deep behind enemy lines? Start with the eye in the sky. Satellite recon, commercial and military grade, feeding real-time logistics data. They knew exactly where that Russian fuel train was headed. Not by accident, but by watching patterns. Now layer in SIGINT, signal intelligence. Phone pings, intercepted comms, maybe even TikTok clips from bored conscripts. In modern warfare, every digital breadcrumb is a GPS coordinate waiting to be used. Then comes the drone. Quiet, small, almost insultingly cheap. It doesn't need to dodge radars. It doesn't care about air superiority. It just needs to get close enough to cause a nightmare on rails. And that's what makes it so dangerous. You can't predict what isn't flying like a plane. You can't fight what doesn't want to live. Let's talk disguise. Some of these drones don't look like threats at all. They resemble civilian quadcopters, cheap enough to be bought on Amazon, light enough to be launched from a backpack. And once airborne, they blend into the electromagnetic noise like a whisper in a storm. Russia has radar systems that can spot fast jets from miles away. But these are low, slow, and ghost-like. By the time you see them, the bridge is already burning. And here's where Ukraine turns defense into offense. They've embraced asymmetry. They're not trying to match Russia tank for tank, missile for missile. They're playing a different game, one that Russia isn't built for. Russia, with its bulky doctrines and hardware from the Cold War, is optimized for force projection, columns of armor rolling forward, shock and awe tactics. But drones don't care how many tanks you own. They care whether you left your fuel truck unguarded. That's the real revolution here. War is becoming software first. This isn't about how strong your military is on paper. It's about how smart your operators are with touchscreens. Ukraine figured that out early. They turned engineers into soldiers and coders into tacticians. Every drone strike now carries the fingerprint of some teenager who grew up playing Call of Duty. Except this time, the stakes are real, and the XP is measured in explosions. So, what happens next? Well, Russia can't stop every drone. They can try jamming, they can throw up electronic smoke. But jamming creates its own problems. Imagine shutting down all GPS within a 5-mile radius, including your own. Now nobody knows where the train is, not even you. In other words, the more Russia tries to defend, the more blind it becomes. And Ukraine is counting on it. 3 hours, one fuel train, multiple explosions, and behind it all, a message far louder than any detonation. See, in warfare, destruction is just the surface. The real battle? Psychology. And in this case, Ukraine wasn't just blowing up Russian logistics, they were blowing up Russian certainty. Let's walk through what this one strike accomplished, far beyond the broken tracks. This wasn't just any train, it was a mobile artery, pumping fuel, ammunition, and equipment to Russian units digging in for spring offensives. Remove that artery, and what happens? You don't just lose fuel, you lose momentum. Tanks stop, missile trucks idle. Soldiers wait, cold, tired, and hungry, wondering why their country can't keep the war machine running. Ukraine didn't have to defeat the troops on the front line. They just had to cut the line behind them. This strike didn't happen in a trench or a contested village. It happened in Russia, on a route that was supposed to be safe, behind air defenses, behind layers of electronic countermeasures, behind the myth of invulnerability. Now, that myth is smoldering alongside a dozen fuel tankers. And it tells every Russian logistics officer, you are never really safe. Not in Belgorod, not in Kursk, not even in your own barracks. That paranoia? It spreads faster than fire. How much did this attack cost Ukraine? Maybe a few $1,000s, a fraction of a missile, a rounding error in a Pentagon spreadsheet. And yet the damage? Millions in destroyed equipment, weeks of logistical setbacks, tons of fuel lost. This is the nightmare scenario for any conventional military, getting outmaneuvered not by a larger force, but by a cheaper, more agile one. You can't outspend drones. You can't intercept every signal. You can't win if you're always reacting, and Russia knows that. Make no mistake, this wasn't just aimed at Russia, it was aimed at every nation watching. To the West, it says, your aid is working, we're not wasting it, we're turning it into surgical power. To other militaries, it's a live demonstration of 21st century warfare. No giant invasions, just smart strikes with smarter tools. To countries buying drones by the crate, this is an ad more powerful than any arms expo. And to authoritarian regimes built on image and control, it's a warning. Control the narrative all you want. But you can't control the skies forever. One train, one target. But the ripple spreads far and wide. And in this game of nerves, where battlefield and broadcast are merging into one, Ukraine just dropped a bomb. On morale. You'd think a drone strike that took out a Russian military train, deep inside Russian territory, would spark a response loud enough to rattle windows in Kyiv. But instead, what followed was silence. Not the strategic kind. The awkward, not sure what to do kind. For a country that prides itself on bold retaliation, this time, the Kremlin blinked. But it wasn't just about pride. Retaliation costs resources, and ironically, those resources were sitting on that train. Fuel, ammo, possibly personnel. All gone in a plume of drone-delivered precision. What do you hit back with when what you needed to hit back is still burning on twisted rails? Every drone that crashes into a supply line isn't just taking out hardware. It's shredding Russia's ability to respond without reaching deeper into an already strained military pantry. And then there's the optics. If Russia strikes back hard, it confirms the hit was real. It acknowledges that Ukrainian drones are flying through Russian airspace like they own the sky, and worse, that the vaunted Russian defense systems couldn't stop it. So instead of punching back, Moscow did what it's increasingly done in this war. It whispered. A vague statement here, a denial there. Just a fire near the tracks, nothing to see. But there was something to see. Satellite photos, local witness videos, and Ukrainian drone footage all painted the same picture. Something big exploded, and Russia didn't want to talk about it. In this new kind of war, silence isn't just absence, it's admission. It means the cost of responding was too high, or the embarrassment of failure too deep. It also means the battlefield is changing. Ukraine isn't just blowing up targets, they're broadcasting victories. They're editing war footage like a YouTuber edits a viral clip. Quick, sharp, globally shareable. Every strike is content, and every quiet Russian reaction becomes the algorithm's favorite contrast. And so, no counterstrike came. No retaliation. Just a gaping hole in the railway and an even bigger one in the Russian narrative. Because in modern warfare, not firing back can be louder than missiles. It says, we're not ready, we're spread thin, and maybe we didn't expect them to get this far. But here's the thing about silence in war. It doesn't last. Not when reputations are on the line. Not when drones keep coming. And not when an enemy is proving over and over that they can hit you whenever they want. So, as the smoke cleared and the wreckage settled into the tracks, Ukraine waited. And Russia hesitated. But hesitation isn't strategy. It's just the quiet before someone else writes the next headline.